For 47 years, the galaxy burned. Not days, not months. 47 years of screaming skies, shattered worlds, and children who learned the sound of explosions before they learned how to speak. Entire civilizations were erased. Star systems vanished from maps. Hope became something whispered, not believed. And then, when the war had devoured almost everything, humanity entered the battlefield. Not with the largest fleet, not with the most powerful weapons, not with ancient wisdom carved from 100,000 years of conquest, just 200 ships against 40,000. The galaxy laughed. Strategists called it suicide. Historians prepared to record yet another noble extinction. But 5 hours later, the laughter stopped, because the war, the longest, bloodiest conflict in galactic history, was over. No planet was bombed, no superweapon fired, no enemy fleet destroyed by brute force. Instead, an empire collapsed under the weight of its own perfection. This is the story of how humans didn't just win a war. They redefined what victory meant. This is the story of the 5-Hour War. The war had been burning across the galaxy for so long that most beings no longer remembered how it had begun. Ambassador Thalen remembered. He remembered the first planet that fell, its oceans boiling under orbital fire. He remembered the second, where the atmosphere itself ignited. He remembered standing over the graves of 3 of his children, each buried on a different world, each killed in a different year of the same endless war. 47 years, 18 billion dead, 400 star systems lost. Now he stood on a small blue planet at the edge of known space, inside a room that felt strangely ordinary. The humans called it the Unified Command Center. By galactic standards, it was unimpressive. Gray metal walls, harsh white lights, no towering monuments, no sacred symbols. Just a long table and 12 humans in military uniforms, sitting in silence. Thalen had expected grandeur. He had expected power to announce itself. Instead, he found simplicity and something far more unsettling. Calm. He had already delivered his plea. He had shown them the images. Cities reduced to glass, refugee ships packed with the last survivors of dying worlds. He had played the recordings. Children crying for parents who would never answer again. He had shown them the numbers. The humans did not interrupt. They did not whisper to one another. They did not look away. At the head of the table sat a woman with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Admiral Grace, Supreme Commander of Earth's combined military forces. She was 63 years old, barely middle-aged by galactic standards, and yet the room seemed to orbit around her presence. When Thalen finished speaking, silence filled the chamber. Then Grace spoke. "I have one question." Thalen straightened instinctively. "Please, Admiral." She folded her hands calmly. "The Galactic Council has over 800 member species. Many of them have been fighting this war alongside you for decades. You have allies with fleets 10 times larger than ours. Species that have been traveling the stars for 100,000 years. She paused. "Why are you asking us for help?" Thalen had rehearsed this answer countless times during the long journey to Earth. But now, standing before beings who looked so fragile, who lived such short lives, his prepared words collapsed. "Because you are different," he said. Grace tilted her head slightly. "Different how?" "For 47 years," Thalen said quietly, "we have learned to fight like our enemy. They burn our worlds, so we burn theirs. They execute our prisoners, so we execute theirs." His 4 eyes dimmed. "We have become mirrors of one another, 2 monsters staring into the same reflection." The room remained silent. "You," he continued, "have never fought in this war. You have not learned to hate us or them." His voice almost broke. "Perhaps that means you can still see clearly." A man to Grace's left leaned forward. His name tag read Colonel Peters. "With respect, Ambassador," he said, "we have 200 warships. The Dominion has 40,000. What exactly do you expect us to do?" Thalen swallowed. "I don't know," he admitted. "I only know that everything we have tried has failed. You are not our best option." He looked directly at Grace. "You are our last." Grace studied his face. The exhaustion, the grief, the weight of an entire civilization resting on one being's shoulders. She had seen that look before. "Give us the room," she said calmly. The officers rose without protest and filed out. Within moments, only Grace Thalen and a woman in civilian clothes remained. Dr. Elaine Cole, Chief Scientific Advisor to Earth. Grace leaned back slightly. "Ambassador," she asked, "what do you know about human history?" "Very little," Thalen replied. "Your species has been known to the galaxy for only 200 years. Grace nodded. "Before we reached the stars," she said, "we spent most of our existence fighting each other. War after war. We nearly wiped ourselves out." Thalen listened intently. "Do you know what saved us?" Grace asked. "No." Grace glanced at Dr. Cole, who nodded. "We got tired," Grace said, "and then we learned something important." "What?" Grace leaned forward, her voice steady. "We learned that the best way to win a war is to make the war impossible to fight." Thalen frowned, confusion spreading across his features. And for the first time in 47 years of war, someone was saying something no one had ever dared to imagine. Ambassador Thalen did not speak for several seconds. In 47 years of war councils, strategy chambers, and emergency summits, he had heard countless theories about victory, superior firepower, bigger fleets, faster ships, deadlier weapons, but never this. "To make a war impossible to fight," he repeated slowly. "I do not understand." "That's normal," Dr. Elaine Cole said gently, stepping forward. "No one does it first." She activated the holographic table. Star systems bloomed into existence above the metal surface. Battle lines, fleet movements, casualty projections. The familiar chaos of a galaxy at war. "Ambassador," she continued, "I have spent 30 years studying this conflict. Every battle, every defeat, every so-called victory." Thalen's eyes narrowed. And I found something strange about the Dominion." Grace crossed her arms. She already knew what was coming, but she wanted to hear it said out loud. "They don't adapt," Dr. Cole said. Thalen stiffened. "That's impossible. Their coordination is flawless." "Exactly," Cole replied. "Too flawless." She zoomed in on a Dominion fleet formation. Thousands of ships moving with mechanical precision. "Their entire military is built on prediction," she explained. "Every ship, every commander, every engagement is calculated in advance by a central algorithm. They don't improvise. They don't question orders. They execute." Thalen nodded slowly. This was well known and feared. "That is why they are unbeatable," he said. Grace finally spoke. "No," she corrected calmly. "That's why they're fragile." Silence filled the room. "Perfect coordination," Grace continued, "requires perfect information." Dr. Cole's fingers danced across the display. "And what happens," she asked, "when that information is wrong?" Thalen opened his mouth, then stopped. In nearly half a century of war, no one had ever asked that question. "The Dominion's strength," Cole said, "is that their system assumes certainty. It assumes the data is always accurate, always current, always complete." She looked up at him. "But reality isn't perfect." Grace stood and walked to the window. Beyond it, Earth's blue skies stretched peacefully. Clouds drifting, sunlight glinting off distant oceans. "Out there," she said softly, "the galaxy is on fire." She turned back. "We will help you, Ambassador," Grace said, "but not by throwing our ships into a slaughter we cannot win." Thalen's heart pounded. "What will you do?" Grace met his gaze. "We will break their certainty." 3 days later, 200 human warships departed Earth orbit. The galaxy watched with disbelief. 200 against 40,000. Some called it symbolic. Others called it arrogance. Most called it suicide. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Dominion-controlled space and immediately did something no military doctrine could explain. They scattered. Captain Daniel Reyes stood on the bridge of the USS Resolute, the human flagship. At 38, he had trained his entire life for a war that had never arrived. Until now. "Admiral," he said carefully, "fleet commanders are requesting clarification. Grace stood at the center of the bridge, calm as ever. What do they want to know? Everything, Reyes admitted. They say our ships are too spread out. No defensive perimeter. No mutual support. They think we've made a mistake. Grace didn't even blink. Tell them we haven't, she said. Hold position. Await further orders. Yes, Admiral. Across 3 star systems, human ships floated alone, millions of kilometers apart. To any traditional strategist, it looked like a death sentence. And that was exactly what the Dominion believed. Admiral, Lieutenant Brookhahn said from her station, enemy fleet movements detected. Grace nodded. How many? Initial response, 3,000 ships. They're moving to intercept our nearest vessels. 3,000 against 200. The bridge crew tensed. Grace smiled. Perfect, she said. Begin Phase 1. Across the combat zone, human ships released thousands of small metallic spheres into space. They were not missiles, not mines, not weapons. Mirror drones deployed, Reyes reported. Han checked her display. Full coverage across all systems. Good, Grace said. Now we wait. The mirror drones did only one thing. They listened, and then they repeated everything they heard, with tiny changes. A timestamp delayed by half a second. A coordinate shifted by a fraction of a degree. An error too small to notice. Unless your entire military depended on perfection. The Dominion fleet arrived at the coordinates where human ships were supposed to be. They weren't there. Confused transmissions flooded Dominion channels. They're recalculating, Han said, updating fleet orders. How long until they realize? Reyes asked. Han shook her head. Their system isn't designed for this. They're trying to fix the data instead of questioning it. Grace watched the tactical display. The Dominion fleet began to fracture. Each ship following its own perfect orders toward positions that no longer existed. They're chasing ghosts, Reyes whispered. Phase 1 complete, Grace said. Begin Phase 2. On a distant moon, a small human shuttle dropped out of hyperspace. Inside were 12 soldiers. Sergeant Eli Grant checked his team one last time. Our target is a communications relay, he said. Lightly defended. Upload the program. No unnecessary kills. They move fast. The relay station's guard were technicians, not warriors. Stunned, not killed. Inside, Private Amy Chin connected her device. How long? Grant asked. 2 minutes, she replied. This adds a 3-second delay to all outgoing signals. Grant raised an eyebrow. That's it. Amy smiled nervously. In a war fought at light speed, Sergeant, 3 seconds is an eternity. The upload finished. They were gone before alarms fully registered. Back aboard the Resolute, Han's console lit up. The delay is active. All Dominion communications in this sector are now 3 seconds behind real time. Grace exhaled slowly. Perfect systems, she said, don't survive imperfection. On the far side of the battlefield, the Dominion High Commander stared at his disintegrating fleet. For the first time in 60 years of command, he felt fear. The Dominion High Commander had ruled the battlefield for 60 years. He was ancient by most standards, his body reinforced by generations of genetic refinement, his mind sharpened by centuries of calculated victory. He had overseen the conquest of dozens of civilizations, crushed rebellions before they could become legends, and turn entire star systems into obedient resources. War was not chaos to him. War was math. Now, the math was failing. Report, he demanded, his voice echoing across the bridge of the Dominance, the largest battleship ever constructed by the Dominion. His tactical officer, a young one, bred for precision rather than courage, hesitated. High Commander, fleet synchronization is degrading. That is not an answer, he snapped. Explain. The officer swallowed. Fleet Group 7 was ordered to intercept human vessels at coordinates 974. Instead, they jumped to 971. And they emerged inside an asteroid field. 43 ships destroyed on impact. The bridge went silent. That is impossible, the High Commander said coldly. The coordinates were verified. They were correct when transmitted, the officer replied softly. But by the time the ships received them, the situation had changed. Something unfamiliar tightened in the High Commander's chest. Fear. Find the error, he ordered. Check the algorithm. Moments passed. The algorithm is functioning perfectly, the officer said. The problem is the data. Data cannot be wrong, the High Commander snarled. Data is reality. The officer hesitated again. High Commander, the humans may be altering our communications. A chill spread through the bridge. They are receiving our signals, the officer continued, and rebroadcasting them. Slightly altered. Delays. Minor coordinate shifts. Nothing obvious. But enough. Enough to turn a flawless machine into chaos. The High Commander stared at the tactical display. 40,000 ships, his ships, were scattering across 3 star systems like debris in a storm. Fleets meant to converge missed each other by thousands of kilometers. Supply vessels jumped into empty space. Strike groups fired on shadows. How long until this corrects itself, he asked. The officer's voice trembled. It won't. Why? Because the system doesn't question information. It assumes correctness. It keeps trying to fix the outcome instead of the input. The High Commander felt something crack inside him. For 300 years, Dominion commanders had not been trained to think. They had been trained to obey. Switch to manual control, he ordered. The bridge froze. Manual control was ancient, inefficient, unreliable, organic. High Commander, the officer said carefully, our commanders have not been trained for independent decision-making. Then they will learn, he snapped. But they did not learn. They couldn't. The first friendly fire incident occurred minutes later. A battleship, receiving contradictory targeting data, fired on what it identified as a hostile vessel. It was a transport ship carrying 2,000 Dominion soldiers. There were no survivors. Then another. Reports flooded the bridge. Ships firing on allies, fleets colliding, entire formations disintegrating under the weight of confusion. The Dominion was not being defeated. It was destroying itself. On the USS Resolute, Captain Reyes stared at the tactical display in disbelief. They're tearing each other apart, he whispered. Gray stood behind him, her expression grim. This was always going to happen, she said. They built a system that removed human judgment. That works until something unexpected happens. Reyes swallowed. And now, Gray said quietly, we wait. Hours passed. The humans did not fire a single shot. They moved freely through the chaos, ghosts among giants. On a neutral observation station far from the battle, an elderly historian recorded what he was witnessing. The humans have been in the war for 3 hours, he said into his recorder. They have not destroyed a single enemy ship, yet the Dominion fleet is collapsing. He watched as explosions blossomed across space, not from human weapons, but Dominion ones. They did not attack the ships, he continued. They attacked the system. Back aboard the Dominance, the High Commander watched his empire unravel. How many ships lost? He asked quietly. 6,000, the officer replied. And rising. 6,000. Not to enemy fire, not to superior tactics, to confusion. Where are the humans? The High Commander asked. They are not engaging, the officer said. They are simply observing. The High Commander's mandibles tightened. 200 ships against 40,000, and they were winning. High Commander, another officer called out urgently. Incoming transmission. Human flagship. Silence fell. The High Commander straightened. Put it through. The hologram flickered. A human woman appeared. Gray hair, calm eyes, posture unyielding. I am Admiral Grace of the United Earth Fleet, she said evenly. The High Commander stared at her. You have crippled my fleet, he said. Yes. You have turned our ships against each other. Yes. Why contact me now? Grace took a breath. Because I want to offer you a choice. A choice. The High Commander laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You destroy my forces without firing a weapon, he said. And now you offer mercy? Your soldiers are dying every minute, Grace replied. Not because of us, but because your system is broken. She leaned forward slightly. In 2 hours, your fleet will be gone. Not conquered, obliterated by its own design. The High Commander said nothing. You can end this, Grace continued. Withdraw to your original borders. Release all prisoners. The war end today. Captain Reyes stared at her. They were winning completely. Why stop now? The High Commander's voice was low. You could destroy us. Yes, Grace said simply. Why don't you? Grace's eyes hardened. Because that's how this war lasted 47 years. Silence. If you refuse, Grace said, we continue. Your fleet collapses. Your enemies will want revenge. We won't stop them. The High Commander looked at the tactical display. More ships dying, more lives erased. My people will call me weak, he said. They will be alive to do so, Grace replied. Long seconds passed. Finally, I accept, the High Commander said. Grace closed her eyes for just a moment. Send a ceasefire, she ordered. Across 3 star systems, the guns began to fall silent. A war that had devoured generations was ending. For several seconds after the Dominion High Commander accepted the terms, no one spoke. Not on the bridge of the Dominance. Not on the bridge of the USS Resolute. Not across the countless warships scattered through 3 broken star systems. 47 years of hatred do not end cleanly. They hesitate. They resist. They wait for betrayal. Transmit the ceasefire order, the High Commander said finally, his voice heavy. All units are to disengage immediately. An officer hesitated. High Commander, some commanders may refuse. Then mark them as criminals, he replied. This war ends now. On the Resolute, Captain Reyes watched the Dominion formation slowly power down their weapons. They're complying, he said quietly. Most of them. Grace nodded. That's enough. She turned to her communications officer. Broadcast on all channels, she ordered. Any vessel that continues firing will be considered hostile, regardless of allegiance. The message went out. Across the battlefield, isolated explosions flickered, last acts of anger, last refusals to let go. Then, one by one, the stars grew quiet. The war was over. On a distant observation station, the historian lowered his recorder, hands shaking. In 5 hours, he whispered, a conflict that consumed half a century has ended. He stared at the silent tactical display. They did not conquer. They did not annihilate. They chose mercy. The word felt wrong and yet unavoidable. The Galactic Council was paralyzed. News spread faster than disbelief could contain it. The Dominion, undefeated for centuries, had withdrawn. Occupied worlds were being abandoned. Prisoner transports filled the void between stars. And humanity had refused every offer of territory, tribute, or political advantage. For the first time in living memory, an empire had been beaten and not humiliated. 6 months later, Admiral Gray stood inside the Galactic Council chamber. 800 species filled a vast space, beings of flesh, energy, gas, and forms that defied description. All eyes were fixed on the human who had ended the war. The council speaker, ancient beyond reckoning, addressed her. Admiral Grace, the speaker said, your actions saved countless civilizations. On behalf of the Galactic Council, we offer humanity a permanent seat among us. The chamber erupted in sound, applause, resonance waves, flashes of bioluminescence. Grace waited. When silence returned, she spoke. We did not enter this war to gain power, she said. We did not seek recognition. She looked around the chamber. We entered because people were dying, and no one else could stop it. Her gaze hardened. Power is not proven by how much destruction you can cause. It is proven by what you choose not to do. The chamber fell utterly still. Later, in a quiet corridor, Ambassador Thalen approached her. I was wrong, he said softly. Grace raised an eyebrow. About what? I thought humans were different because you were innocent, he said. Because you had not learned war. He shook his head. You understand war deeply. You simply choose a different ending. Grace allowed herself a small, tired smile. "We've had a lot of practice failing," she said. "Eventually you learn." Thalen extended one of his 4 hands. "Thank you, Admiral." Grace took it. "Thank me in 100 years," she replied, "if the peace still holds." On the far side of the galaxy, the historian completed his final entry. When humans entered the war, he recorded, they did not just end it, they changed what war meant. He paused. They had the power to destroy an empire and chose restraint. In all my centuries of study, I have never seen a species do that. He saved a record under a simple title, the 5-Hour War. Perhaps, he added quietly, that is what makes humans the most dangerous species of all. Peace does not arrive with celebration. It arrives with silence. Across 3 star systems, the guns had fallen quiet. But the echoes of 47 years of war still lingered. Wreckage drifted through space. Broken hulls, shattered weapons, frozen bodies locked inside suits that would never open again. The battlefield looked calm. It was not. On the bridge of the USS Resolute, officers moved softly, as if loud voices might shatter the fragile stillness. Captain Reyes stood near the viewport, watching a Dominion cruiser slowly power down its engines. "They're just sitting there," he said. "No formations, no commands." Grace joined him. "They don't know who they are without the war," she replied. For generations, the Dominion had defined itself by conquest and certainty. Victory was not a goal, it was an assumption. Now that assumption was gone. What happens if they regroup? Reyes asked, "If they rebuild and come back?" Grace didn't answer immediately. "When that day comes," she said finally, "we'll stop them again, and we'll offer peace again." Reyes turned to her. "Every time." "Yes." On the Dominance, the High Commander sat alone. For the first time in 2 centuries, there were no tactical displays in front of him, only stars. Reports scrolled silently in the background. Withdrawals confirmed. Occupied worlds abandoned. Prisoner exchanges underway. Each line felt heavier than the last. An aide entered cautiously. "High Commander," she said, "the fleets are asking for guidance." He closed his eyes. "For centuries," he said slowly, "we taught our people that certainty was strength." He opened them again. "We were wrong." The aide said nothing. "They did not defeat us by being stronger," he continued. "They defeated us by understanding us." He stood. "Begin restructuring the command doctrine," he ordered. "From the ground up." The aide looked shocked. "We will teach our officers to think," he said, "even if it takes generations." Across liberated worlds, citizens emerged from shelters they had lived in for decades. Skies once filled with fire were empty. Children who had only known war asked questions their parents couldn't answer. Is it really over? No one was brave enough to say yes. On Earth, the news spread like wildfire. Humanity had entered a galactic war and ended it without firing a single decisive shot. There were no victory parades, no monuments raised. Instead, debates erupted. Some called Grace a hero. Others called her reckless. She let them go, critics argued. They deserved punishment. Grace listened to none of it. She stood alone in her office, staring at a single image, an early photograph of Earth taken from orbit. "So fragile," she murmured. Dr. Cole entered quietly. "They're arguing whether you should have destroyed them," she said. Grace smiled sadly. "That was always going to happen." "Do you regret it?" Cole asked. Grace shook her head. "No," she said. "If we had destroyed them, this war would never truly end. Someone would come back angrier, stronger, more certain that mercy was weakness." She turned. "We didn't end a war," she said. "We interrupted a cycle." The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Fear dominated the chamber. If humans could dismantle an empire in 5 hours, what else could they do? Some delegates argue for containment, others for alliance. A few whisper the word threat. The council speaker raised a limb. "Humanity has shown restraint," the speaker said. "That alone sets them apart. Or proves they are hiding something," another delegate replied. The debate lasted for days. Humanity waited. Meanwhile, The historian continued recording. I have documented the rise and fall of civilizations, he said. Most wars end with treaties soaked in resentment. He paused. This one ended with something rarer. He searched for the word. Choice. The Dominion had been given a choice. And so had humanity. 6 weeks later, a single message arrived at Earth. It was not encrypted. It was not guarded. It came from a former High Commander himself. Your mercy has destabilized our culture. Some call it weakness. Others call it betrayal. But our children are alive to argue about it. That matters more than victory. Grace read the message twice. Then she closed her eyes. The galaxy did not celebrate peace. It studied it. Military academies dissected the 5-hour warframe by frame. Perfect systems were questioned for the first time in millennia, and a dangerous idea began to spread. What if power didn't require destruction? Grace stood once more at the viewport of the Resolute. The stars looked the same, but everything had changed. Admiral, Rhea said quietly, history will remember this day. Grace nodded. I hope, she said, it remembers the silence more than the victory. The galaxy did not fear humanity because of what they had done. It feared them because of what they had refused to do. For thousands of years, power in the galaxy had followed a simple rule. Those who could destroy did. Empires rose on conquest. Peace was enforced through fear. Mercy was a story told to children, not a strategy used by admirals. Humanity broke that rule, and the galaxy did not know how to respond. In military academies across 1,000 worlds, instructors replayed the same recordings again and again. Not the chaos, not the explosions, but the silence. How did 200 ships defeat 40,000? Students asked. The answer was never satisfying. They didn't fight the fleet, the instructors replied. They fought the assumption. Perfect coordination, perfect information, perfect obedience. Humans had looked at perfection and asked a question no one else dared to ask. What happens when perfection is wrong? On the Galactic Council, fear took a new shape, not the fear of invasion, the fear of influence. If humans can dismantle an empire without firing a weapon, one delegate argued, what prevents them from doing the same to us? Another answered quietly, only their choice not to. That answer terrified them more than any fleet ever had. Admiral Grace understood that fear. She felt it every time she walked into a chamber and conversation stopped. Every time representatives watched her hands instead of her words. Every time silence followed her footsteps. Humanity had become an idea, and ideas were dangerous. A closed-door session was called. No cameras, no observers. Only the most powerful voices in the galaxy. The council speaker addressed Grace directly. Admiral, your species has demonstrated a capability that destabilizes the current balance of power. Grace nodded. That was never our intention. Intent does not change consequence, the speaker replied. Several delegates spoke at once. You interfere in a war you were not part of. You rewrote military doctrine overnight. You force an empire to survive its own defeat. Grace listened. When the room finally quieted, she spoke. You're afraid that we'll do it again, she said. No one denied it. Grace leaned forward. You should be more afraid if we don't. The chamber stilled. For 47 years, she continued, this war burned because everyone followed the same rules. Bigger fleets, stronger weapons, total victory. Her voice hardened. We showed you a different rule. And now you're afraid because you can't control it. She stood. We don't want control. We want an end to wars that exist only because no one is brave enough to stop them. Silence. That silence was not agreement. It was uncertainty. Far from the council chamber, the Dominion was changing. Slowly, painfully. Former officers struggled to make decisions without algorithms. Commanders hesitated, doubted, argued. Mistakes were made. Lives were lost. But for the first time, responsibility belonged to individuals, not machines. The former High Commander watched it all unfold. They are angry, his advisors warned. Some want revenge. He nodded. Of course they do. And if they attack again, then humans will stop them again he said quietly. The advisor hesitated. And if the humans don't? The High Commander looked toward the stars. Then perhaps we will deserve what follows. On Earth, children ask new questions. Why didn't we win? Why didn't we punish them? Why didn't we take their worlds? Grace answered one classroom herself. Because winning isn't the same as ending, she said. A child raised a hand. Will there be another war? Grace paused. Yes, she said honestly. Probably. The child frowned. Then what was the point? Grace smiled gently. The point, she said, is that the next war doesn't have to last 47 years. The historian completed another entry. Humanity introduced the most destabilizing weapon the galaxy has ever known, he recorded. He waited. Choice. Not chaos. Not violence. Not domination. Choice. They proved that power could pause, he continued. And in that pause, civilizations were forced to confront themselves. He ended the recording with a quiet admission. I do not know if the galaxy will survive this idea. Grace stood alone aboard the Resolute one final time before returning to Earth. The ship would be remembered, so would the battle, but she knew something history might miss. Ending a war was easy. Living with peace was harder. Admiral, Rhea said softly, do you think they'll remember what you did? Grace looked at the stars. I don't care if they remember me, she said. I care if they remember the moment they didn't have to kill each other. Somewhere in the galaxy, a child born during the 5-hour war would grow up never hearing sirens, never hiding underground, never learning to hate an enemy they had never met. That child would never know Admiral Grace's name, and that, she believed, was victory. History rarely changes in a single moment. It usually shifts slowly, generation by generation, mistake by mistake. But sometimes, history breaks. The 5-hour war was one of those moments. 1,000 years from now, historians would argue about tactics, technology, and probability. They would debate whether the Dominion was already doomed, whether the war would have ended eventually without human intervention. They would miss the point, because the most important thing humanity did was not strategic. It was moral. Admiral Grace stood once more before the Galactic Council, not as a commander, but as a witness. The chamber was quieter than it had ever been, not because of fear, because of reflection. You ended a war that defined our age, the council speaker said. What lesson should the galaxy take from this? Grace did not answer immediately. She thought of burned worlds, of children who never grew old, of soldiers who followed orders they never questioned. She thought of a perfect system that destroyed itself because it could not tolerate doubt. The lesson, she said finally, is that certainty is the most dangerous weapon ever created. Murmurs spread through the chamber. When you are absolutely certain that your enemy must be destroyed, Grace continued, you stop looking for any other outcome. She looked directly at the speaker. We didn't defeat the Dominion. We gave them uncertainty. And uncertainty gave them a choice. The former High Commander of the Dominion listened to that speech from a quiet chamber light years away. He no longer wore ceremonial armor. No banners hung behind him, only stars. They will never forgive us for losing, one of his advisors said. Some already call this the greatest humiliation in our history. The High Commander nodded. And yet, he said, our children sleep without fear. The advisor hesitated. Do you believe the humans acted out of mercy? No, the High Commander replied. I believe they acted out of understanding. He stood slowly. They knew what endless war turns a civilization into, because they had nearly become it themselves. Across liberated worlds, life resumed in ways that felt unreal. Markets reopened under skies that no longer burned. Schools replaced shelters. Children learned constellations instead of evacuation routes. Many did not even know who humans were. They only knew the war had stopped. And that was enough. On Earth, Admiral Grace quietly retired from command. There were no statues, no grand ceremonies. She returned to a small coastal city where the ocean was louder than politics, and the stars felt distant again. One evening, a young officer asked her a question that history never would. Do you think peace will last? Grace watched the tide roll in. No, she said honestly. The officer looked surprised. But, Grace added, neither does war unless we let it. The historian made his final archive entry. I have spent centuries believing that survival belongs to the ruthless, he recorded. That mercy is a flaw evolution eventually removes. He paused. I was wrong. He reviewed the footage one last time. The moment the ceasefire spread across 3 star systems. The moment the guns fell silent, not because they were destroyed, but because someone chose to stop firing. The humans did not end the war by proving they were stronger, he said. They ended it by proving they were free. Free from certainty. Free from inevitability. Free from the belief that destruction is the only answer. He titled the entry, The 5-Hour War, then added a final note. Humanity is not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are not the oldest. They are not the most advanced. But they are the only ones who looked at absolute power and chose restraint. That choice may save us all, or doom us in ways we cannot yet imagine. He closed the archive. Far beyond recorded space, stars continue to burn. Conflicts would rise again. Empires would test humanity's resolve. Someone, someday, would challenge the idea that peace was possible. And when that moment came, the galaxy would remember 5 hours. 5 hours when a war that lasted longer than some civilizations ended not with annihilation, but with a question. What if we stop?